This evening, we're going to talk about kindness, and our very special guest, Kelli, here will be telling us about some of the amazing science in her brilliant book called The Rabbit Effect, and I'll leave Kelli to explain what the rabbit effect means. But before and after we hear from Kelli, we're going to have some support from our lovely friends from the Museum of Happiness to help us experience a little bit of kindness for ourselves and for each other. So the first person I'm going to introduce this evening is Vicky from Museum of Happiness, who's going to help us think about our own kindness. Vicky, over to you.
Thank you. So hi everybody, it's such a pleasure and joy to be here and celebrate World Kindness Day with you all. So just wanted to start off by posing a little question. Who do you think we speak to most out of everybody? And just shout something out. Absolutely. So all the time we're chatting to ourselves, we're listening to ourselves, we're in inner dialogue, narratives and stories. It's really important what we're saying to ourselves and how kind we're being to ourselves. And at the Museum of Happiness, a lot of the community, including myself, struggle with this kind of kindness to self and really including ourselves in this circle of kindness. We can often be spreading a lot of kindness with others, putting a lot of energy out, but it's so, so important that we're including ourselves in that. So just wanted to do a little exercise with us. So just inviting you to close your eyes and just get really nice and comfy. And just inviting you to bring to mind a time where a friend or a loved one was going through a small challenge or struggle. Just a small one for the purpose of the exercise. And just imagining now, what did you say to them? What was your tone of voice like? What was your body language like? And just noticing with curiosity as best we can today. And now just inviting you to bring to mind a time where you were going through a small struggle or challenge. And again, just a small one. Noticing the things you said to yourself. The tone of voice. The words, the body language. And again, we're just noticing with curiosity instead of judgment as best we can. And when you feel happy to, just opening your eyes. So just getting a show of hands, who was kinder to their friend than themselves? So welcome to being human. That's what most people say. So Dr. Kristin Neff, who's one of the leaders in mindful self-compassion, says over 70% of people are kinder to others than they are for themselves. And the really good news is we can retrain our brain so we are kinder to ourselves, so we can bridge that gap. And just wanted to share some of the things that the community have found really useful at the Museum of Happiness that's been deep-rooted in mindful self-compassion and self-kindness. So when we wake up in the morning to ask ourselves, what do I need to take care of myself right now? How often do we ask ourselves that question? I know I was never asking myself that question. I was busy thinking of all the things that I needed to do for everybody else, work, life, family, friends. And the other question, what's the kindest thing I can do for myself right now? I don't know about you guys, but I was hardly ever asking myself that. Now I ask myself these questions every single day. And what I've found is when I'm putting my own needs first, when the community say that they're asking themselves those questions and actually really giving themselves permission to give themselves what they need, it's like what they say on the plane about putting your own oxygen mask on first. And Dr. Kristin Neff's got a beautiful saying that says, we can't give from an empty cup. And believe me, I've tried. And after experiencing a period of burnout a couple of years ago, I don't leave my self-care or self-kindness to chance anymore. I actually schedule it into my calendar. Can I get a show of hands of who has a diary or a calendar? Yeah, so most people do. Put your hand up if you schedule in you time or any self-kindness or self-compassion stuff. So a few people, that's awesome. We really, really encourage that, to not leave our self-kindness to weekends or evenings or chance or holidays, to really consciously design our lives so we're kind of really giving ourselves what we need. And the feedback from the community was that we actually need more help and support with this. So I run a Facebook Live every Sunday called Self-Care Sunday, where we as a community, we meditate together, we check in what our internal weather's like, and we set self-care intentions for the week ahead and support one another as a community. So I just want to invite you all to that so that we can keep continuing to include ourselves in our circles of self-compassion and kindness. Thank you.
Vicky, thank you so much. That was lovely. And I think you also mentioned to me you've had a bit of an unexpected series of events today, and you've both experienced some kindness from others and had to practice some self-kindness on the way here. Do you want to say a bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the universe likes to send me these curveballs. Usually if I've got a talk on stress management, resilience, it will send me something really stressful that day. And I'm like, universe, I've got enough backlog of examples. We don't need any new ones. So this morning I had a really important meeting at Shoreditch House, and I got up really early, meditated, prepared for it, and then got on the tube, and we were stuck at Tottenham Hale, and there'd been an accident on the track at Oxford Circus. So I was on the tube for about 20 minutes. I thought, I'll get off, I'll call the person, let them know. I'm sure they'll have compassion for the situation. And I noticed my stress levels rise, and I had to really practice self-kindness of, there's nothing you can do about this. Compassion to the person that's, on the track, and you've done everything you can. I'm not going to spend the rest of the journey beating myself up that I'm going to be late, doing all these different stories. And I just had some deep breaths. Anyway, the last phone call I made to that person, I lost my phone. I left it somewhere. I have no idea where it is. So I had to ask lots of people along the way how to get to different destinations. The person was really kind when I got there, really understanding. And then getting here, I got to Liverpool Street Station and the Central Line was severe delays. There'd been an accident again. So I went out, tried to get a bus. I had to ask lots of people along the way, what bus? The bus driver was like, it's not my bus, but I'll take you to the next bus stop. Free of charge, she didn't charge me. And then I have been here so many times to Conway Hall, and I was like, I definitely know my way from the station. Turns out I don't. So I had to stop and ask, I think, about 6 people where it was, and I took so many wrong turns, and I could notice my stress levels rise and rise and rise. And I just deep breaths, and I just thought, I'm doing the best I can right now, and that's all that I can do. And there's no point me beating myself up when I'm about to talk about self-kindness, because that would be really ironic.
Thank you, Vicky. That's a lovely story, and it's always heartening to hear about the many people who are there to help us on our way when we need it. So it gives me huge pleasure now, folks, to introduce our very special guest, sort of expert speaker this evening, Dr. Kelli Harding, who I had the great pleasure of connecting with when she was first writing this book, which I'm very grateful mentions Action for Happiness within the book. And we were together at the World Happiness Summit in Miami earlier this year. But I'll leave Kelli to talk about the sort of revelations that are in this book. But I think this is one of the most important themes and topics we could possibly be thinking about right now, because kindness we tend to park as being a little sort of soft, fluffy, nice thing that may have, maybe a nice thing to have. But actually what I think Kelli's work shows as a physician, as now an author, as a sort of expert on this topic, is that this is at the very heart of what we should prioritize, not just for our health, but sort of for almost everything that matters in our society and our lives. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Kelli Harding.
Thank you. Can you all hear me okay? Okay, terrific. Well, first of all, I just wanted to say what an absolute pleasure it is to be here. This is such a lovely organization, and when I was doing my work on kindness, I came across it, and it has been truly a great pleasure of writing the book to have the opportunity to get to know the organization, to get to know the many dedicated volunteers. It's really fabulous, and then to be a part of this incredible event. So thank you to everyone. And I also wanted to just say thank you to each of you who's taken the time, and created the space in your life today to be here, because I know it's not easy and we all have a lot of obligations and life gets busy. So thank you for that. As we get started, I'd love to actually get to know a little bit about who's in the audience. So I can somewhat see you out there with the lights, but if you could just raise your hand if you've been to an Action for Happiness event before. Wow, so we've got some serious regulars here. That's terrific. And tell me, too, if any of you work in health or mental health? Okay, wonderful. So, and anybody in public health? Okay, wonderful. So part of my job this evening is to actually convince you that you all work in public health, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Also, do we have any students here this evening? Oh, fantastic. And so another piece of this is also that we're all students, and so we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. And then I wonder, too, if anybody here is just wondering, oh, any first-timers to an Action for Happiness event? Okay, fantastic. And same for me, actually. I've watched from afar, but this is my first time to actually be here, so what an incredible treat. So what we're going to, oh, and also, who's here wondering, like, what's the deal with these rabbits? Like, why are we talking rabbits? Okay, great. I'll explain that as well. So first, I'm just going to tell you, well, first, I'll tell you about the rabbits, I promise you. And then we're going to talk about, eventually, the big picture of health and why we're talking about kindness and health this evening. But first, I wanted to tell you a little bit just about myself. So, as Mark mentioned, I'm a physician, and I live and work in New York City, and I've mostly practiced emergency psychiatry at Columbia University in New York City. So, emergency psychiatry is somewhat the Wild West of the emergency room. Especially in a busy city hospital like New York, I've seen sort of everything. So, it's like I've seen people, rip out things from the ceiling, flip over stretchers, dance naked. It's sort of the intensive care unit for wounds that are invisible to the naked eye. And it's a million miles away from this lovely, quiet room where we are tonight, but it's exactly that work that brought me here. So before we go any further, I just want to take 1 second, and I know you've already met a lot of people that are around you, but introduce yourself quickly to someone that you haven't met that's around your seat right now, because this is all about connection. So...
I love your dude giving...
It's funny, some groups I do that exercise with, and there's almost no conversation, but this is not a problem here tonight. So I think that's a very good sign for this organization and this group here tonight. So thank you. So I want to tell you a story, and it starts actually a long time ago when I was a little girl, and I decided that I wanted to become a doctor one day. I really wanted to help people, and so I knew that in order to help people, I would need to study hard and go to medical school. And once I did that and I got there, I was determined to learn absolutely everything I could about the human body and how it worked. So that meant every day I would sort of lock myself away into, a quiet library cubicle, learning everything I could from my textbooks. It meant I spent a lot of time in laboratories, looking down microscopes. And eventually, after a couple years, I felt ready. I had all the knowledge to get on the wards and to start to use my toolkit of medicines to try to help people get better. And so then, one day, I arrived on the wards, and it became pretty apparent that there was a mismatch between what I had been reading in the textbooks and what I was seeing on the floors. And so the the mismatch went something like this. I would start to see two patients with the same diagnosis and two very different courses of illness. One would not do well, the other would continue to live a full life. I would see people who on paper looked like they were very, very ill, and then you would meet the person and they were continuing to function and be engaged in their life and continue to, sort of beat the odds and continue to do well. And then on the flip side of that, I would see people who on paper looked sort of squeaky clean, but then medically, but then, it's like their labs checked out, their imaging checked out, but then you would meet them and they didn't feel well and they weren't doing well and kept feeling like there was something that was being missed. And I started to wonder, what are we missing when it comes to medicine? Because it seems as though sort of our expectations and the reality of sort of what we're seeing aren't lining up. And so because of this, I thought it had something to do with the mind-body connection. So I started training in internal medicine or adult medicine, and then from there I ended up training in psychiatry. And I thought it had some connection there, but I still didn't really feel like I had answers. So then, because of that, I ended up actually going to, at Columbia, we have a fellowship program, and I ended up doing a fellowship in unexplained medical symptoms. And so what this means is, people who have symptoms, but, medically we can't quite figure out what's going on, but functionally they're not doing well. I also got boarded in what's known as psychosomatic medicine, which is mind-body medicine, essentially. And meanwhile, I was continuing to work in the emergency room throughout, and I kept seeing this same mystery over and over, where it was, patients who would with very treatable illnesses coming into the hospital and continuing to decline in their functioning. And then on the other side, I would also see patients who, would do great in the hospital, but then leave and just continually come back over and over, where we couldn't quite figure out what's going on. So then, thankfully, a rabbit came to the rescue. So that's where the rabbits come in. So the rabbit study, one of my, during my research fellowships, one of my mentors, this lovely fellow at Harvard named Dr. Arthur Barsky, he is a kindred spirit in terms of talking about this mystery of medicine. So, we would have moments where we talk about, the placebo effect or the nocebo effect, which is getting ill from something that that has inert ingredients, as opposed to the placebo where you get better from things with inert ingredients. And then we would talk about these sort of mysteries like, why are people more likely to die around their birthday or in the 6 months after a close loved one? And so he knew this was an area of interest. And so one day he said, I heard about this rabbit study, and I think you might like it. So I tracked it down, and I'll tell you the story of the rabbits. So here it goes. So back in the late 1970s, there wasn't a clear understanding of diet and heart health. And so Dr. Robert Neerum was doing a study, and it was a very basic science. He's a basic science researcher, and he was doing a basic science study looking at rabbits and heart health. So he basically gave these virtually genetically identical rabbits the same high-fat diet. And so at the end of the study, he expected all of the rabbits to have the exact same health outcome. And lo and behold, he looked at the results and he discovered that one group of rabbits had way better health outcomes than all the other groups of the rabbits. So being good researchers, they figured it was something wrong with their study. So what they ended up doing is they looked at the protocol, everything checked out. So then they started looking around and they looked at themselves and they realized that all the rabbits that fared better were all under the same care of this one researcher. And she was a particularly kind and caring individual. And it turned out she wasn't just giving the rabbits kibble, She was picking up the rabbits. She was petting the rabbits. She was talking to the rabbits. She was really giving these rabbits love and kindness, essentially. And much to Dr. Niram's credit, the easy thing to do would have been to just replicate this study with another, swap out that research assistant, put someone else in and get the results they were looking for and publish it. But much to his credit, he was observant and he was blown away. Could it be that somehow our social world is changing physiology? Now, back in the late 1970s, this was a radical idea, and if he was not such an esteemed researcher, the study probably would have fallen right there. But instead, what they decided to do is they decided to replicate the study, this time with very tightly controlled conditions. And they got the same result. So it turned out that, in fact, that the social world was somehow getting under the skin. Kindness was like getting under the skin of the rabbits and changing physiology dramatically by 60%. They published it in the journal Science, and then, like many wonderful journal articles, it sort of sat in the, in the journals, and not a lot sort of changed within medicine. But here's the thing. So that study got me to walk across the street. Literally, it's right across the street in New York City at Columbia, from the medical center over to the School of Public Health. And in the School of Public Health, I discovered that there are 4 decades of research showing how our social world gets under our skin and is in fact the major determinant of our health. So let me just repeat that, because as a physician, I was shocked to discover that it turns out that, excellent medical care, while critical, only accounts for probably about 10 to 20% of our overall health status. Now just think about that for a second. I mean, it's absolutely critical that we have access to that care, but at the same time, only 10 to 20%. So what's going on here? So it turns out genes play a role in that, but they're not as fixed as we think. Instead, it really turns out what's playing a role is all the ways that we are interacting with each other in our daily lives. It's our social world. And it comes down to our connections in our homes, in our relationships, in our schools, in our workplaces, in our neighborhoods, and in our broader community. So that means that the vast majority of health, because most of us think of health as like lifestyle things like diet, exercise, sleep, the occasional trip to the doctor, but in fact, it's everything that's happening during the day is the vast majority of our health. And I know that it's not something that we typically think of within the biomedical model. And so that was what made it so urgent for me that I start to talk about the message, not only of the rabbit effect, but all of this data. It's basically, what the field of public health calls the social determinants of health, and it's what the rest of us call kindness. So I'm going to share some of the data just in all these different areas, because it's actually quite mind-boggling when you sort of look at some of the data, because it doesn't fit what I had traditionally thought of with all the health being in the body, but it's so critical. So just a couple different areas. Okay, so one of the things that I know you guys have all talked about here a lot, but it's really important, and the UK is like light years ahead of America on this one, is loneliness. So we know that loneliness is as risky to health as well-established risk factors such as smoking 15 cigarettes a day, high blood pressure, heavy alcohol use, and even being overweight. So a big one that most people don't think about, but there have been large population studies actually done here in the UK looking at work and health. And there's these amazing studies called the Whitehall studies that, actually show that the biggest predictor of the biggest predictor of if somebody was going to have a heart attack or not wasn't sort of cholesterol or blood pressure. It had to do with their employment, and specifically how they were treated in their employment. So, we often think it's really important to have a great doctor, and that's absolutely true. But it turns out it's actually just as critical to have a great manager. So also, if you are a manager, to think about that you're actually contributing to the health of your employees. And so follow-up studies have shown that the big predictor of that has to do with how we're treating each other, and also the autonomy we feel and the support that we feel, not necessarily even as employees, but as human beings at the places that we work and we contribute. Oh, this one gets me every time. So it turns out probably so I call these the hidden factors of health, these social dimensions, because, as a physician, it wasn't what I expected. But a big one, and probably the mother of all hidden factors, is education. So first of all, I'd like to congratulate everyone in the audience tonight, because you're taking charge on this one by being here, because you're taking a hold of education. And so it turns out that for every one life saved by biomedicine, education saves 8. Yeah, right? So the idea with this, though, is the data around formal education is striking. We know that not graduating from high school carries the same equivalence as a lifetime of smoking. But here's the exciting part, is education is actually also about lifelong learning. And we know that the brain is far more plastic than we realize throughout the lifespan. So, I would just encourage you as part of your homework to, check out a class you're interested in. I know Action for Happiness has some wonderful courses, coming to lectures, doing something that sparks your interest in following through, because it turns out it's actually also quite good for your health. And we'll get a little bit more into that. Because education, the best education, also fires up your sense of purpose. And so here's where I'm going to read some of these stats. It's like unbelievable to me. So this is a funny thing. We had some clinicians in the room, right? Or do we have any physician clinicians or okay, great. So you've probably seen this too. It's like you'll have a patient who, despite the odds, sort of makes it to something that they really want to get to. And so it turns out that actually studies have shown that people with a sense of purpose and usefulness are at a significantly reduced risk of all causes of death. They have lower risk of stroke by over 72%, or by 72%, heart disease 44% lower risk. And also, this one is quite interesting, nearly half the reduced risk of Alzheimer's. And where this gets particularly interesting are there are a series of studies that show they track people over time, and they look at their sense of purpose and usefulness and what self-reports of that. And then after the person passes away, they look at their brain on autopsy. And it turns out not only is having a sense of purpose protective for the brain, but here's the interesting part. It didn't necessarily correlate with what they found on autopsy. So in other words, the brain might have shown a lot of what we call plaques and tangles, or signs and symptoms of Alzheimer's, but it turns out that if you had a sense of purpose, it somehow overrode the biology so that the person functioned better. So, this is all just something to think about. So, in the book, I give like hundreds of examples. These are just some of them. But it hopefully starts to make you think just that much differently about health and sort of what makes for a healthy lifestyle. Neighborhoods are also... What's that? Oh, I thought someone had a question. Okay, so neighborhoods. This one is also quite big, because in America, we like to say that a person's zip code is a bigger predictor of their health than their genetic code. And it really pans out, because you can see even within the same city, from one point to a couple miles up the road, huge differences in lifespan, and it's really quite unbelievable. But this is something we can change tremendously. And what's really neat, we'll talk about more, there are many ways to do that. The other thing is, there have been studies that show, time in nature boosts your immune system. And it also, gets your natural killer cells going, which is also great for reducing tumor sizes and burden of disease. But here's the other thing. There have been studies that show in hospitals, when you look out on greenery, you're less likely to ask for pain medicine. Nurses staff seems to like it too, because often you're sort of less asking for things. And then the other thing is people are discharged a day sooner from the hospital oftentimes. So, if you can, ask for that garden room. And then just one last one before I turn it over to these guys again, is so mental well-being and optimism, which is a big topic here and something that I know many of you that I got an opportunity to talk with before are working on right now, correlate with longer survival. And so middle-aged and older adults who have a positive attitude about aging live about 7.6 years longer than those who don't. So that's the same benefit as maintaining normal blood pressure, exercising regularly, and not smoking. So it's just, as you start to think about these hidden factors in our social world, a lot of it's going to come down to kindness. And we're going to talk about how there's this tremendous ripple effect that every single person in this room, myself included, is participating in. But we'll do that after we take a break to do an interactive exercise. So, thank you.
Just before I hand over to Shamash to sort of, as Kelly says, do some more interactive stuff, just one thing that's on my mind really, I guess, as a physician, given what you've just told us and this importance of the rabbit effect of kindness, how has that changed how you are just on a patient-to-patient basis, that knowing that human dimension is so important? What does it mean in practice?
Well, I'll tell you a little bit about that with the ripple effect, how it's changed my practice. But I would say the big thing, there's so many different things, but probably the biggest one is that it's very exciting because it means that we have so many more opportunities to think about health and to think about it, not just in what pill can I take to fix this problem, but also thinking about, things that are happening in all the different spheres of our life that we can actually make tweaks to improve how we're feeling and how we're functioning, even when we're living with, illnesses as well.
Thank you, and I look forward to hearing more about that in a moment. Just to say, folks, that this lovely Rabbit Effect book, which I've read and think is brilliant, unfortunately we're trying to get copies of it here this evening in case any of you wanted it, but there's been a problem with getting the publishing rights, I think, in the UK. So what we'll do, instead of having it here this evening, is when we send a follow-up email tomorrow, we'll connect you to where you can find the book if you would like to find out more about all these fascinating studies. But now I'm delighted to hand over to my great friend Shamash, who's going to get us thinking about the interactive way that we can be kinder to each other. Over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for having us, and thank you, Kelly, for that wonderful talk. So I'm, along with Vicky, a co-founder of the Museum of Happiness, and the way we fund our project is, and it kind of happened quite naturally, is that organizations get in contact with us, and they say, you do these workshops about happiness and gratitude and kindness. Can you come along to our organization? So about a couple of years ago, a large investment bank got in touch with us, and they said, we've got this employment well-being day or something. Can you come and do something do one of your happiness things? And we're like, okay, what about the science of gratitude? They're like, yeah, that sounds good. Come along and do that. So we woke up very early one morning and traveled with all the commuters on the tube, and came along to this boardroom, and we had this boardroom, it's very official, and we had a PowerPoint presentation, and Vicky and I were away doing this PowerPoint presentation on the science of gratitude, and we're also talking about kindness. And then we thought, we were just chatting while they were doing one of the exercises, and we're like, why don't we try getting them to actually do some kindness for someone else, actually get them to text someone and say something kind to them? And we were not too sure if this would go down well or not, but we thought, come on, let's stretch our boundaries a bit, let's see what happens. So we shared this idea, and half the room were like in slight shock that they had to do this, and some of them were quite embarrassed. They're like, well, I've never said this before to someone, but okay, here goes. And some of them just wandered out the room, and we didn't see them again. No, that's not true. So they actually took a few minutes to do that, and some of them looked a bit embarrassed. They were stretching themselves. Others were kind of quite relaxed about it. And they got some texts back immediately, and one of them, that person's wife, was so pleased about this text that we ended up working in her organization as well. So I thought this is a good example of the ripple effect happening. So yeah, doing acts of kindness in this way is kind of a really nice thing to do. So I'm going to invite you guys if you want to do that. But before I kind of invite you to do that, a few weeks ago, I went to a conference organized by another kind of expert in the field of compassion, Professor Paul Gilbert. And he talked about something I hadn't heard much about, which is called the flow of compassion. And he said that there's actually 3 flows of compassion, and you can kind of equate them with kindness too. And the first very important one that Vicky beautifully explained to us is about the idea of self-compassion or self-kindness, so the flow of kindness to ourselves. And there's a difficulty, there's a challenge there, there's a fear that some people have, a lot of us have, with self-compassion. Then the other one is, which Kelly was talking about as well, was compassion or kindness to others. When we do an act of kindness towards someone else, there's that sense of connection, there's a sense of warmth. And associated with that, there is a certain challenge, there's a certain fear. If it was very easy to do, then, that's all that would be happening all the time. But there must be some resistance to it or some challenge. And then there's a third one, which I hadn't thought about actually, which is actually the process of receiving compassion. And when I considered that, I thought, actually, yeah, that's quite a difficult one for me, and many others said that too. So there's a certain fear of receiving compassion that we need to work at overcoming, because of the only way that someone can give compassion is someone else is willing to receive that gift. So what we're going to be doing now is inviting you, if you wish, to do this little act of kindness. Put your hand up if you've got a phone on you, by the way. Okay, nice, beautiful. Vicky, actually, I brought 2 phones for you, actually, so you can have one. But she was just sharing with me there was about 10 acts of kindness that took place by her not having a phone. So maybe we can spread more kindness in the world by losing our phones. So I'm going to invite you now. If you don't have a phone or you don't want to kind of switch your phone on and start getting all the other messages there, then you can just do this as a reflection. You can think about what you would say to someone when you get home, or maybe a little letter that you can write, another act of kindness that you can do, which I've done. It's quite a nice thing to do for people, maybe even on their birthdays. Actually write down a little letter saying what you appreciate or like about them, and then actually reading it to them. It's a really beautiful experience. So, I invite you, first of all, to reflect. Now, there's different people you could do this with. You could be someone like a loved one where you normally say kind of something nice to them and you can choose that person. It could be someone that you maybe, every now and then you speak to them and you say something nice to them, so you can consider what you want to say. Or if you really want to stretch yourself a bit, it is World Kindness Day, and you might want to stretch yourself a little bit and think about, actually, there's someone who I kind of maybe take a little bit too much for granted, and maybe I haven't actually said anything nice or kind to them or really appreciated what they have done for me. But to do this actually takes a little bit of courage. So there's a courageous compassion or courageous kindness that's required. So if you feel like doing that, then you might want to practice that one. So just take a few moments to reflect, maybe as I'm speaking about who you want to pick. It could be any one of those. Just take a few moments. It doesn't matter which one. You can do all of them as well afterwards as well, so it doesn't matter. But have a little think, and maybe just share it with the person next to you, and then actually go ahead and switch your phones on and have a go at sending that text right now. It's happening here, people. Okay, so away you go. Chat to your neighbor and then send that text. Do you need a phone? I've got 2 phones actually. One is a very basic.
So I can be here.
Hoping is.
Haven't mentioned that.
Okay, well, I can say that to
Actually,
him
there could be a
afterwards
talk.
as well.
Yourself right now. This is quite difficult, and if you're not kind to yourself, the irony.
I'll have to
Really
get you a
mind-blowing.
copy of
So,
the
yeah,
book.
we've got some mics, so let's hear some things people said, I think.
Books,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
then
No
there was
worries.
some mix-up with the publisher, and
Thank
came
you.
unraveled here. I stole
These
your
things
seat,
are sent to
the-
try us. Tester, compassion and kindness.
So, thank you, everyone. I certainly enjoyed sending some messages and getting some nice responses. Shamash, did you want to hear some of what we've heard from the audience?
Yeah. Did anybody actually send the text? How many had a go at that? Because that's quite scary in itself. Did anybody manage to get a reply? Not yet? Yeah. What did you send? And if I may ask, what did you get? What reply?
We've got a microphone coming.
Oh, the microphone's coming. Alex, the mic man.
I sent a message to my 27-year-old daughter, but I did warn her, because otherwise she'd think I was crazy. But I said that I thought she was an amazing person, and that she was very kind and compassionate naturally.
Yeah. And did she reply?
And yes, she replied immediately. She wrote, "Wow, I'm going to make you homemade chips as a reward."
There you go. The power of kindness. Any others? Anybody else sent a message? Yes, thank you. Just hang on one sec.
Hi. I sent one to my uncle and didn't say why, so hopefully it doesn't feel as like some suicide note type thing. But just to say thank you, and he's been an amazing uncle to me since I've been in London over the past years. He's moved me every single time I've moved, which is a lot. And every time I move, I'm always on the top floor of places that don't have lifts.
Wow.
So yeah, couldn't really have done it without him.
Okay. And have you got a reply or not yet?
No, he probably will never text back. He doesn't really do messages.
It's the thought that counts, the fact that you sent it. How did it feel to send it?
Good.
Good, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for having the courage to share with the audience as well. Thank you. Yeah. And round of applause for our first person who shared as well. Another one, maybe one more.
One down the front here.
One at the front here. Get your smartphone out. Thank you.
This is to a good friend who I don't appreciate enough, called Pete. Dear Pete, just to let you know how much I appreciate your friendship and your perseverance in sticking with me through thick and thin.
Thank you so much. And how did it feel to send that text today? Felt good, yeah.
I was just telling my friends here, I did a course a few months ago where you had to phone someone up to say sorry. You had to find someone you wanted to say sorry to.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, like a forgiveness process. Thank you. Well, thank you to all those that shared and also those that had a go. And even if you didn't, if you just wanted to reflect on it today, that's absolutely fine. Maybe consider doing it a bit later on, whether it's a text or a letter or maybe just a little act of kindness or even a little smile. But thanks a lot for participating in that and also sharing. So I really appreciate that. Hand it back over.
Shamash, thank you so much. I sent a message to my wife. I sent a few messages. My wife, "Hi, darling, just want to say how much I love and appreciate you." That's all, really. And then she replied back, going, "Oh, that's very sweet of you. By the way, we must sort the kids' bike lights out." Fair enough. She's always focused on... Love that. Kelly, back to you with the ripple effect.
So actually, I have to say, I texted some people here in the audience because I feel super grateful to be joined by some of my favorite people in the world this evening. And really, truly, one of the most lovely things about writing the book has been the opportunity to connect with so many lovely, wonderful people whose either work I've admired or who I just adore. So thank you. And I got a response back, so thank you. So here's the punchline. Here is what I wish I had learned when I was just starting out in medical school. So it turns out that kindness and connection, our relationships, profoundly shape our physical and mental health. And they do this because they help us both, prevent things, but also live better with whatever diseases may come. Unfortunately, it's just part of the human body that things happen, but at the same time, how we learn to deal with them and how we're able to cope has so much to do with kindness. We know that kindness, there are lots of studies showing this now, and, the science has gotten really cool, not just public health population studies, but, all these studies looking at, epigenetics now and telomere research and the neuroimmune system, show us that kindness and actually gratitude as well that we just practiced here tonight is quite beneficial for us. And it costs nothing, and you can't overdose on it, which is fantastic. And it's an ample supply. So just realize that's always something you carry with you that can make a big difference in the lives of people. So a big piece of this that we are not talking about is, and it has to do with our daily choices, whether we decide to be kind in a situation or kinder than necessary sometimes in a situation or not. But really this comes down to talking about our mental health. And I have to admire Action for Happiness because it's something that is through the fabric of what's being done, because we know that there is a lot of pain out there, a lot of pain. And we also know that, 1 in 5 of us over our lifetimes will have a diagnosis of mental health. Some say even it's up to half. It's hard, it varies a bit. But we do know that things like depression are the leading cause of disability worldwide. And, when it comes to pain, there's still so much stigma. And part of it also, we know that practically every other person that passes us on the street has a history of an adverse childhood experience, which is something that we've also talked about, or an ACE that we've talked about, that has also profoundly affects health outcomes. But because there's so much shame and trauma, there's so much shame and stigma around talking about things like trauma, and even when it comes to seeking health and talking about our mental health, I think that's one of the big challenges. But so when we practice kindness to ourselves and we practice kindness to others, we're being part of the solution, and it's got this incredible ripple effect. You can sort of think of yourself in the center, and then like your homes and your one-on-one relationships that happen there. And then your broader friendships, and then, your places of work or school, and then your neighborhoods and those broader communities we talked about. It's sort of like these pools of ripples, and in the book I've got this diagram, but what's so neat about it is this is an interactive thing that we are all taking part in all the time. And the important thing is every single person who's in this room, your actions matter, so that the thing that you just did that took a couple seconds probably just made someone else's day, which is incredible to think that you have that power. We all have that power to do that. But, it's no secret. It's like kindness. It sounds so easy, right? But it's like we know in practice that kindness is actually quite hard. And we know this in part because of probably my favorite study that I actually just shared with one of my friends here earlier. It's called the Good Samaritan Study, and it was done back at Princeton University, also back in the 1970s, or actually it was the late 60s, I think, showing that, among theology students, that sometimes even the best of us have our moments. And so the study went something like this. So, a group of theology students were assigned to write a 3 to 5 minute speech about why they wanted to become a minister. And half the group was told to write that speech about the parable of the Good Samaritan. So they sat down to do it for a little bit, and then after a while they were told, we need this room for something, so you're going to have to go across campus to go to deliver the speech. And half the group they told, you have all the time in the world, and then you'll be early. And the other half they said, you're running a little late, you better hustle, and so, or something to that effect. And so they, and then unbeknownst to the people in the study, they had a confederate of the study. They had somebody in clear need of help on the path that person had to cross. And it turns out that pretty much anyone who was in a rush just blew by that guy. And it really didn't matter if they were going to tell the story about the Good Samaritan or not. So for me, this message is we all have our moments, right? Even the best intention of us. I mean, I just wrote a book about kindness, so my kids like to remind me, like, didn't you just write a book about kindness? So we all have our moments. We're all human. I think the other thing to keep in mind, and this is getting at, this idea, they're not just kind people and unkind people, but we're all sort of on this spectrum of how do we operate in a way that's more kind and practice more kindness. So this is the challenge, but this is also the work of the Organization for Action for Happiness. How do we do this, and how do we be our best selves? Like, one thing we can take away from the Good Samaritan study is, if you can, give yourself the gift of time, because we do tend to be kinder when we're not in a rush. So all of that being said, so here's the irony. So I went to medical school, to help people live healthy lives. But it turns out, you don't need a white coat necessarily to make that happen. But what you do need to do is to do things like be a good parent, be a good partner, be a good co-worker or supportive co-worker, be a great manager, be a kind neighbor, sign up to volunteer, teach at a class at a local library. Oh, by the way, volunteering, it turns out, is also quite good for your health. So for those of you that are here as volunteers, terrific. Volunteers live longer. Yeah. So. And the really big takeaway, and also look for those opportunities in your day where you can stop and make a difference for somebody else, because often it doesn't take as much time as you think. But here's the big one and the challenge, and this is why kindness is not easy, is how do you see that we have so much more in common than we realize, and to try to focus on that as much as possible. So here we are not only benefiting our own health, but all the health of the people around us. So thank you so much for your time and for thinking about this and for broadening your view about health beyond the body alone, and how it's how our social world, it continues to impact us. I'm absolutely grateful to be here, so thank you.
Kelli, thank you so much. There's still plenty more to come, folks. So in a moment, I'd like to get us thinking again in a bit more interactive way about how we can put some of this into practice. But I wanted to just come back to something Shamash said, which has been staying with me, which is that, of course, in a world where we want to give more kindness, we also need to be able to be willing to receive it. And I really feel that sometimes I'm not as willing to ask for help as I might be. And in fact, it was quite a shift for me happened when I read more of this kind of work and your book and other things, made me realize that when I do ask someone for help, I'm giving them an opportunity to boost their own health and happiness by showing kindness. And actually, I think there's something here about the actions we can take are self-kindness and kindness to each other. Those lovely messages and ideas and connections with each other, but also that willingness to receive kindness and actually be willing to ask for help, and just to see how that all helps us connect more. So is that what you find as well?
No, it's true. And I think it's been echoed throughout the evening. It's often easier to be kinder to others than to ourselves, except for, I guess, that 30%. I don't know. But also, I think a big piece of kindness is this interaction. It's sort of, I was talking earlier, it's not just enough to do all the self-work. You also have to be reaching out to people and building community, because we know it's those relationships at the end of the day. I mean, actually, another great example of that is, there's this longitudinal Harvard study that many of you have probably heard about. It's like at the end of the study, what they found is that really the thing that was the biggest predictor of health for people, again, it wasn't the blood pressure, cholesterol, it was the quality of their relationships. So, we really need to be thinking about, our relationship with ourselves and also our relationship with others.
Thank you. So our final sort of interactive thing this evening and there will be a chance to sort of share some more feedback and maybe ask a couple of questions as well. But we've heard a lot. We've had a chance to practice kindness to self. We've had a chance to share a bit of kindness with others. We've obviously heard a huge amount about why this matters so much for our health and our society as a whole. Our name of this sort of community movement is Action for Happiness, and there's something really important about that action. We can study this theoretically as much as we like, and there's some really, really strong science behind this, but it only really changes when we put it into practice in our lives, in our communities, our families, with our children, our co-workers, and so on. So I'd like us, to invite all of us, myself included, all of us on stage as well, to try and bring to mind something we'd like to do as a result of the prompting and ideas we've heard about this evening. So let's each try and bring to mind something personal that you'd like to do as a concrete action. And it might be as simple as carving out more time for self-kindness in the midst of a really busy, stressful time for you. It could be about following up on some of Shamash's, suggestions for just sharing that gratitude, that connection, that sort of, that kindness to the people that mean so much to us, and perhaps we don't recognize it. But it may also be coming back to some of the wider points Kelly's been making, the way that we are in our workplace, as a manager, as a physician, as a carer, as a co-worker, as a neighbour, that there are so many ways we can put this into practice. So let's all, I might encourage us to take maybe just sort of 10 seconds of a quiet, mindful pause and just bring to mind something that you'd like to do to take away from this really inspiring set of content this evening. And as you bring to mind something you'd like to do, we know that these actions become more likely if we can really visualize the person we want to connect with or the thing we want to do, and try and think about where you'll be when you take this action. Will this be at home? Will this be while on your journey? Will this be at work? Will this be at the school, the workplace? And try and sort of bring to mind how you'll remember to do this. It might be you're going to write it down in your diary. It might be you're going to tell someone this evening. It might be that you're going to make a mental note or make it part of a friendship gathering, a meeting, or something that's coming up in your diary. So really try and bring to mind not only what you're going to do, but where you'll be and how you'll remember to do this action that's going to spread a bit more kindness for yourself or for others. And then as we sort of bring our attention back into the room, I'd like to invite us all, if you're able to sort of to stand up and just feel the ability to move around a little bit. So what I'd like us to do is, if you could find somebody near you that you've not spoken to yet this evening, and again, say a quick hello. And then if you feel able, just share with them something you'd like to do to spread kindness, and then listen to one of their ideas, and then we'll just come back and hear a little bit more of this. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. I'm really sorry to interrupt all your lovely conversations, but if I could just gently encourage you to share thanks to the person you've just been talking to, and maybe retake your seat. We've got about another 10 minutes left, and I'd just love to hear, I'd love us all to hear some of that energy that's just being shared in the room. I can see people who've become really connected through that conversation. Could we have a little bit more of the lights in the room? That would be wonderful if you could bring up those lovely coloured lights again so we can see each other a bit more. We've got some microphones. I'd just love to hear a few of the examples of actions you either found yourself sharing or heard someone say. And if as part of that you do have a burning question you'd like to ask the Museum of Happiness team or Kelly, then please feel free. But let's try and keep it in the spirit of all of us together being the ripple. So I'd love to hear some of your kind actions. So let's see a show of hands. Yeah, starting here. Thanks, Fabian.
Hello. Thank you very much, everybody. I'm really enjoying it. It's my first experience with Action for Happiness, so it's great. I have a gorgeous 18-year-old at home who's finding life very difficult. And she's not doing anything at all. And so I'm finding it quite difficult as well. And, oh dear, I'm getting a bit emotional, sorry. And so what I want to try and do each morning is, rather than going in and saying, oh, look, you've got all the glasses from the kitchen again in here, or something like that, I want to start her day with a lovely, positive, kind thought, rather than picking up on all the negatives, which is quite easy to do right now. And it's not doing her any good, it's not doing me any good. So I think that's what I'm going to try and do.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else has a hand raised over there? Alex, thank you.
Hey.
Hi.
I spoke to Rachel, actually, and I said that my action felt quite selfish because it was for self-care. And I'm recognising that I'm suffering from chronic stress at the moment. And I started shooting a couple of weeks ago. And I love it! I love it! Shooting, rifle shooting. So,
under controlled conditions.
Under controlled conditions,
okay.
yeah, absolutely. I have an issue with my neighbour, but that's got nothing to do with it. It was time to be outdoors and to take a breath and to focus completely in that moment. And I didn't realise how much I would really appreciate that. So who knows, I might be in the Olympics in 2024 shooting.
Wow.
I'll give it a go, thank you.
That's lovely, thank you. I'm not sure I've ever heard the concepts of self-care and shooting linked together before. I think that's lovely. There's a lady with a hand up here and another one on the front row, and then a gentleman behind. So Alex, if you want to take this lady, and then Fabian, if you want to head back towards the...
It's Helen.
There we go.
Hello, my name's Helen. This is my first experience, and it's fantastic. I've never spoken publicly before. I did speak to Dr. Kelli in the pub earlier. Very privileged. I just wanted to say, I'm from Leicester. I travelled down on my own this morning on the coach. And on the whole journey here, when you were talking about doing things on journeys, I started with the coach driver. And I was the last to get off the coach and things like, I chatted to him and I was telling him where I was going and I said, acts of kindness that you can do and makes a difference. And he said, wow, talking to you, everybody's rushing about, but you've got time to... I said, well, I have got the time, but, I would try and make that action. And I did many other things, chatting to different toilet attendants, information people, all that. It was just... And it was just a fantastic feeling. And I know that because I've done it previous, but today I was like overload. And the best thing I did, and I've never done this before, I actually spoke to a homeless guy in Oxford Circus on the Underground. And it was absolutely crazy. It was just, oh my God. And he was sitting there in a sorry state, probably a chap in his 40s. He had a little sign and a little coffee thing for collecting money. Anyway, he was crunched up against the wall, so I crouched down beside him and I just said, do you know what day it is today? And he didn't look at me and he just said, Wednesday. I said, yeah. And he said, is it the 13th? He said, that's unlucky. I said, no, it isn't. I said, shall I tell you what day it is? It's World Kindness Day. And he said, is it? And I said, I'm on a mission to spread the word to as many people as I can on my journey. And I told them I was coming here. And I've made a list. And I said, but I've never done this before, spoke to anybody. And we have homeless people in Leicester, of course, but I've not done it before. So it just made it was a bit like courage in a way, because I didn't know what his reaction was going to be. Next minute, an underground attendant came, and she was very bad-tempered. And she said, I kept calm, and she said, will you move from here? She said, you're going to get walked on. Well, we weren't. Although people were busting, we were right up against the wall. And I said, and he said, oh, come on. I said, no, she can wait a minute. I said, and I turned to her and I said, it is World Kindness Day today. And then she said, but it's illegal. Not that, but illegal to be in this place, you see, when I'm rushing about. And I said, look, forget the illegal. You know, I said, I am on a kindness mission. So anyway, she went off, and the next minute, this big guy comes from the underground, and he looks at us, and this guy, homeless guy, was looking, and he says, I think we better move. So I said, oh, we'll be gone in a minute. Well, he went, because it was getting busier and busier, and then I got up, and the chap and me just walked off a bit, and he said, we better move, I don't want to cause any... Anyway, he went, and I just said, I hope, what you're going to do at Christmas, and you talked about crisis and all. And then I walked off, and I saw these two, an attendant, the one that had challenged me, and another one, and she was talking about me and this chap. So I just stood so she couldn't, I was behind her, and I was listening to her. And she said, oh, I told her it's illegal. And so I said, oh, hello. And she said, on her face, and went, and are you telling your colleague it's World Kindness Day today? and then that was it. And she said, well, is it? I said, well, it might be, but show her a bit of compassion, will you? And then so I chatted to her a bit, and anyway, eventually she sort of realised and thought, wow, it made her feel a bit, I think. So anyway, that was it, and that's my little story.
You are, wow. I love that, Helen, thank you.
I coped with that better than I thought I would, and I hope I can do more in future, because I really would love to spread the word.
You're an inspiration to us all with that. Thank you so much. And that's a lovely, lovely example of the ripple effect that we've heard about this evening. And all those people you've connected with today, not only will they have potentially benefited directly from you, but they'll go on, and that will have an effect on how they are with others. So that ripple will keep going and going. So thank you so much for sharing that. And there's another lady with a microphone here. How do you follow that story? Oh, sorry, 1 second. Kelly.
Helen, do you still need your phone charged?
Oh, yes, I got my phone.
You got it? Okay, I was going to say if someone had a charger for you, because you've got to get home tonight.
Live kindness coordination. I like that. That's great.
Helen has like the most amazing T-shirt on too that says kind. Okay, but you're sorted.
Well, we
Terrific.
hope that you experience the same spontaneous kindness that Vicky experienced in her journey as well. Lady here.
So my name's Natasha, and I'm a proud supporter of the Museum of Happiness and Action of Happiness and all the great stuff you do. I ended up inadvertently volunteering to hand out cards at the front, having met the wonderful Harpal and the Kindness Cafe. So I upped my happiness levels with a bit of impromptu volunteering, and I loved handing out the cards. And it actually reminded me that this morning I saw a lovely lady called Tiu Dehan, who also works in the world of happiness and the concept of pronoia, so the fact that instead of paranoia being the world's out to get to you, that the world's out to give you blessings. And so my act of kindness is taking her idea that she did today on her way to New York. She's on her way to New York to spread joy there, of getting some colourful cards, maybe some of the ones from the department store for the mind, and basically writing letters to strangers and leaving them in random places around London so that people can find them. I think Tiu left hers in a book in W.H. Smith at Heathrow Airport, so I'm going to do similar things and leave them in random places to see who can discover them.
That's lovely. Thank you. Brilliant. We're running out of time, and there's a couple of things I'd just like to do before we close. But let's just take one more. There's a gentleman over here with his hand up, and we'll just have one more kind action, and then we'll close.
Thank you. That was an amazing talk from all of you. Thank you so much. I've just got a quick question for the doctor, if I may. And we touched on this when we briefly talked about dating. Why do women like bad boys? You know, the whole evening has been about kindness. So many women tell me that kind men are boring, friend zone. Now we want a bad man with a bit of an edge on him, you know. We don't want kind men. They're just boring. They're friend zones. Why do women want bad men if kindness is so important to our health?
Like what?
Great question, Kelly.
So I would say this, because, and we spoke about this earlier too, that I think there's a misperception that kindness means weakness, and that is absolutely untrue. In fact, kindness requires a lot of courage and a lot of bravery, and I think for those that practice kindness, they're quite aware of it. You know, we were talking about in terms of, you know, forgiveness. That takes a lot of courage and a lot of kindness, and to try to navigate. I mean, so we were also talking about this. So, you know, raise your hand if you took a math class in school. All right, yeah. Raise your hand if you took a foreign language. How many of you took a conflict resolution class? Okay, we've got one. Maybe are you a lawyer or a barrister? So, because I was going to say it's unusual, right? But we deal with conflict every single day of our lives, and that's not something we're necessarily trained in, but it takes a lot of kindness, a lot of courage to navigate that, and I think there's a lot of strength in that. So I think it's a misperception, and frankly, I think kindness is cool.
Yeah. Thank you. Great question, great answer. And of course, what we need in our society as a whole, in our political debate and our public debate as much as anything, is more kindness and compassion, to realize that can be a strength, not a weakness. I'd just like to mention the lovely Compassion in Politics project. I know there's someone here from the project this evening, and we've been collaborating with them on their work at the moment to try and sort of stop the nastiness in British political debate and to try and encourage just more respect and compassion and tolerance. You know, it's possible to disagree with someone, but do it in a way that's compassionate rather than attacking their character. I couldn't agree more, and it certainly echoes a lot of what we've heard this evening. But we're running out of time, and I wanted to wrap up, as well as thanking each of our wonderful guests, also maybe just give them a chance to share one final thought with us all as before we leave here this evening. We've all got our kindness ideas we're going to take with us, but maybe Shamash and Vicky, I mean, thank you so much for your contributions. What would you like to leave us with as a final thought?
I was listening to a talk today by Dr. Stephen Hayes, and he said that if there was any time that you could choose to be born, but you wouldn't know where you were born, so it'd be random where you were born, but you'd know what time that you were being born, then the time where there's the least violence is actually this moment right now. This moment would be the best time to be born. And it's hard to believe with everything we hear from the media, but apparently that's the statistics. However, apart from all the statistics about, the amount of levels of violence going down, the one thing that they've found that has been going up is the challenges with people's mental health. And it's gone up by a stepfold. And it's not just because we're talking about it more, even things like suicides are on the up. And so this is a serious kind of thing. And we've been talking about kindness, and importantly, we've been kind of putting a playful side to it and a fun side to it. And yes, it definitely has that dimension. But a small smile or a small act of kindness that someone's done today could lead to something that could be life-saving for someone. So it's a very small act, and almost by definition, little acts of kindness are small, especially from one person to another. So there's actually, and it doesn't really matter whether you believe in God or not, but it's more to do with that sense of connection with something sacred. And I think it's almost a sacred act. It's a holy act. It's a spiritual act to do a small act of kindness. It's something that doesn't come from the realm of mind and logic. It's something that comes from our heart, actually. And I think all the different speakers today were kind of touching on that, as well as the people here when they shared these small acts of kindness. So it seems kind of very light-hearted and fun, and yes, it has that dimension. I'm very much into that. But also, it's nice to remember that it's actually, in some ways, a sacred act as well. So it's something worth remembering.
Vicky, what's on your mind? Yeah.
So there's a couple of things that kind of feel alive in my heart. So the first thing would just be kind of, that self-care and self-kindness isn't selfish. I think we're conditioned and told that it is to put our own needs first. But I think when we really, truly look after ourselves and give ourselves what we need, I know I'm such a better friend, business partner, colleague. I'm just a better person to be around when I've meditated or I've done yoga or I've cooked myself a proper meal and taken a lunch hour. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, something I'm really excited about, we launched something really exciting at the Museum of Happiness today, which is our Guardian Angel Patreon scheme. So at the Museum of Happiness, we're a tiny little grassroots community organisation, and we feel really passionately about sharing the science and art of happiness in playful ways with as many people as possible, and especially those people that really need it the most. So we spent a year based in a homeless hostel working with really vulnerable people. We work with children in care, we work with children with severe mental health challenges. And what we wanted to invite people to do is come on the journey with us. So we launched today, and Mark will send it in the follow-up email tomorrow. If you want to be a guardian angel for the Museum of Happiness and kind of contribute to what we're doing, you can, and you can become a patron. You can also make a suggestion for where we go. So if you know of a school or a hospital or a hospice or a homeless hostel or a group of people or one person that would really benefit from a visit from the Museum of Happiness, let us know, and you can be a guardian angel of that project. So thank you.
Wow. Thank you. And Kelly, you've already shared so much wisdom with us this evening, but do you have a final thought to leave us with?
So one thing I would just say is that, and that something I hear from a lot of people is this idea of, well, I'm kind, but the system is not good, or my workplace is horrible, or or my neighborhood's no good. Here's the thing that I feel like, and this is a big conversation right now within the field of medicine, is we are the system, we are the neighborhood, we are the workplace. Like, you can make the change no matter where you are, and studies show that you have a far greater influence than you realize on a circle of people around you, and they have influence on the people around them. So, just recognize you really are the change. So, if you can commit to it and practice kindness in different formats, it's really going to impact the lives of others in a tangible way that's going to improve our collective health. So thank you.
Amazing. Thank you all so much for being here this evening. It's been a real privilege to hear so much and to sort of connect in so many different ways. The only thing I wanted to say to end is do check out Kelly's wonderful work and book and articles and so on. Do check out the Museum of Happiness, and if you can support that Guardian Angel scheme, fantastic. We're not actually holding an Action of Happiness event this December. December tends to be quite a busy time, so we'll be back with an exciting program of new activities in 2020. But what we will have in December is our kindness calendar. Some of you will remember the story of one of our supporters, Peter, who created this as a little local project in Northampton a couple of years ago, and we then turned it into a colourful calendar and put it out there as an alternative Advent calendar for December 2017. And then we were amazed to find that 4 million people tried to download it, and it completely destroyed our website, and kindness spreads, it seems. So we've continued, as many of you know, to create these monthly calendars. They get huge engagement all year round, but particularly in December. So we've already got it. In fact, it's going to be launching very soon on our website. It's pretty much ready to go. So anything you can do to help spread the kindness calendar idea in December, put it up on your notice board at work, put it on the school notice board, share it on your fridge, give it to your friends, share it on social media. Together we can help create these ripples and help these ideas reach millions more people. So thank you so much for being here, and please join me in giving a massive thanks to our guest speakers this evening, Kelly, Vicky, Shamash. Thank you.